Hello, I am a human rights activist, and I'm going to talk to you about how you can use your mobile phone, maybe not for empathy, but for a lot of good stuff. So I'm a human rights activist, and I'm part of a global network, as Andrew said, that empowers people, that enables people to use video and participatory technologies in the fight for human rights. That is today an amazing thing, right? Because there are billions of people who now have a tool that I believe is the most powerful tool you can have in the fight for human rights right here in their pockets. And it's a video-enabled mobile phone. But I wake up every morning and I ask myself one question, and it is, with all these amazing new participants and all these people who can be part of this movement, how do we make sure that they can be safe when they do civic witnessing? And how do we make sure that the videos that sometimes they actually risk their lives for really will make a difference? So I grew up in the Netherlands, and I got my first camera when I was 12. And yes, those are wooden shoes, and no, they are not very comfortable. So what do you do when you get a camera? You start filming, you start photographing the world around you, your direct environment. That's actually what this guy did. He got one of the first Sony handycams in the early 90s. He was an immigrant from Argentina, and he probably got it just to film his family or to film a birthday party. But on March 31st, on March 3rd in 1991, he woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of police sirens. So he unpacked his Sony handycam, and he looked and he pointed it out of the window, and he filmed the savage beating of by four Los Angeles police officers of a man, an African-American man called Rodney King. So he probably is the first true citizen witness. And we all know that that video had a huge impact. It sparked a national debate about police brutality. It caused reforms, and it eventually actually led to the conviction of 2 of the officers. But the story that is much less known is the fact that this man, his name is George Holliday, received death threats. And people started really harassing him, showing up on his lawn. It severely disrupted his home life, his family life. And I heard that even today, 25 years later, he still has an unlisted number. So in the world today, we know visual imaging, visual images, visual documentation, we are all participating. So that's an extremely exciting thing. We can all be witnesses. And if you listen to Snapchat, they're talking about a daily amount of 10 billion video views per day. And you know, Facebook, they're slaggers. They're 8 billion video views per day. That is a huge amount of visual documentation that's happening. And it expands the ecosystem who really could use that documentation for human rights. And even this guy has figured out that video is a very, very powerful tool. So what we like to think about is, with all these new participants, how do we turn them into safe and effective civic witnesses? There are eyewitnesses, there are citizen journalists, there are media collectives springing up all over the world, sometimes in very repressive regime circumstances. So what are the challenges that these people really face? And there are massive new challenges that we're facing, and I think we as a community need to figure out how we bridge those challenges. This is a video we all know. It's the video of Eric Garner, an unarmed man who died after he was put into a chokehold by the police. But the guy on the right, you may not know. He's another Staten Island resident, and his name is Ramsey Orta. He pulled out his mobile phone to actually make this video, doing what he considered a civic duty. He knew Eric. But for him, in his own words, it turned out to be hell. The police was and still is severely watching him, threatening him. He had to move homes. He himself says he lives in fear. He's also become quite an amazing community witness. And we talked to him, and one of the things he said, if only I would have known not to put my name on that video, my life would have been totally different. So what we think about is, how do all these people who can be amazing witnesses and who are contributing to exposing the brutality in their communities, how do we make sure they have that information and they know that? Similarly, live streaming is an incredible way to do real-time monitoring, keeping your public officials sort of in line. But the live streamers, particularly because they're easily geo-targeted, they're very easy to be found. I was talking to a woman in St. Louis, a media activist, and she actually told me that post-Ferguson and post a lot of the people who are really engaged in live streaming, according to her, 50% of the people have actually quit because of the severity of the harassment and the threats that they actually receive. So how do we make sure that live streaming can truly be a very effective tool? And this is Kianga Mwamba. She was stopped at a red light in Baltimore, and she knew she had a right to record, so she pulled out her phone when she saw 2 cops arresting a man. She was tased, she was verbally and physically abused, and she was put into jail. Interestingly, she was arrested for resisting arrest. I always find this a very paradoxical thing. But she thought in the back of her head, my phone kept recording, so at least when I come out, when I get out of this jail, I have my story, and my story will prove the truth. And when she got her purse back the next day, the video on her phone was gone. So her daughter, she has a teenage daughter, pointed out to her that her phone actually had backed up that video to her Google account. So what I think about a lot is, how can we make sure that that millions of people have the media literacy and the civic witnessing literacy to be able to do that and to know that that actually makes a difference. In her case, it helped her bring a lawsuit and get a settlement from the Maryland police. Now, you can't always, if you do that, you have to think about who are you trusting to be the safeguards of that treasure trove of videos, of the results of all the work you're doing in your community, to be a good citizen. So in this case, there's a group of citizen journalists, they're called Photography is Not a Crime, and they had for 10 years done their civic duty by monitoring and doing citizen monitoring the police behavior. But the videos that ended up in their YouTube account did not really comport with Silicon Valley's idea of transparency, or what constitutes a graphic video that is not safe to the public, right? So their account was deleted. Luckily, people interfered, and right before it was permanently deleted, 10 years of amazing work, it was reinstated. But I think that the people who run these large technology companies should really start thinking hard about what is it, like what kind of terms of service should you have to really enable people all over the world to be part of this process and to make sure that these kinds of videos don't get deleted. And that's something at Witness we do very actively, is bringing these cases and saying, think about the opportunity we have here and think about how you would change the way you actually set your policies. And on the other side of the risk spectrum is a lot of body cams that are being worn by the police. Now, that means that it's a bit of a Wild West out there, right? Like people, there's not a lot of clarity about what that means for people's privacy or the regulations about when you turn them off and on. But it also means that if you're a civic witness, you need to be able to prove your story, because there's going to be somebody else that's going to have a story against yours. And in some cases, not always, of course, in some cases, that is the story of the perpetrator that now exists. So how are we going to bridge this gap? Because we have to, because there's a huge opportunity on the other side of that gap. And one thing, going back to Kianga, is she keeps repeating, when you listen to her video, she keeps repeating, you can't do this, I have a right to record. So she was unbelievably informed, but how do we make sure that everybody knows this? How do we get that kind of media literacy in the hands of many people? And I believe, for example, that the social media platforms could do a great job at reaching a much larger number of people with this kind of information. At Witness, we do it by having lots of digital guides and tools that get downloaded and shared via social media, just to make sure that people understand the basics, the ABCs of civic witnessing. And one of the other things we did is we started talking to YouTube and said, what happens to people when they actually start sharing these videos? Because there are situations, particularly if you're in a repressive regime, where when you speak out on a video, it may mean it may be a matter of life and death, or it may mean you get arrested, or maybe the person behind you in that video should not be in that video. But remember that 8 billion number? We are all sharing these videos all over the world, right? So it's really important that we can at certain points in time, we need to blur, we need to safeguard our identity and our privacy. And other points in time, you may want to be known when you speak out. So we worked with YouTube to put a custom blur tool in the YouTube editor. And that is actually something we would love every platform where you can share videos to do. Now, the other thing is your video needs to be trusted. And the stuff that makes your video really strong is the metadata. It's all the stuff we're so scared of. It's the data that actually tells you where you were, when you were somewhere. So we worked together with the Guardian project, they're amazing Android developers, on something called Camera V. And it's a bit of technology that actually hashes all that amazing information. It keeps it with your video, so you actually have a clean chain of custody. Now that's something you may want to turn on in some cases, right? You want to show exactly when and where it was, and you may want to turn it off in other cases if you do not want to be located. So that's been an amazing thing, but let's think a little bit bigger, going back to these millions of people who could be such amazing participants, and their videos need to be proven, they need to stand up in court, they need to not be denied, they need to be authenticated. So we've been thinking about something called proof mode. Imagine that that is an auto default on everybody's phone. Imagine that everybody had a phone that had a proof mode in it, or platforms had that as part of their standard package. Now, going back to the live streamers, the other thing we're thinking about a lot is, so how do we actually unleash the power of all these people who may be not physically in the space where somebody's live streaming, but they're with you when you're actually live streaming? And this is a really great example that happened during the World Cup in Brazil, where a citizen journalist was equipped with a little camera. And the military police guy on the left says to him, "Watch me, I am going to search you now," doing an illegal search. And he says, "I am watching you, and 5,000 people are watching you too." And that's a very powerful way to put leverage of people who are not necessarily in that situation with the person who is at that moment by themselves. And it could be little things. It could be literally a little LED light that actually shows how many people are with you when you are witnessing. But let's think a little bit bigger. Think about services like Periscope. Think about the ability of people to actually be now real-time witnesses when things happen. So this is a screenshot of somebody live streaming a Syrian refugee who's trying to flee Syria. They're on a boat in the middle of the night. And if you look at what happens on Periscope, there are little hearts. People can put little hearts, and they say things like, "Let's give them hearts in support of our hope for them." That's great. That is maybe what Sherry was talking about. That's compassion. Right? But what if you could do something that actually led to real action? What if you could think about all these people that at that moment in time are in that live stream, and what if they were a video editor and they could quickly send that story to the news in a way that it could make a difference? What if they could potentially be humanitarian aid workers who could actually do something? Or what if they were asylum lawyers? So we've been hatching this project called Mobilize Us, where we think about the power of distant witnesses, and distant witnesses who are able to take real action, and how do we sequence their actions. And lastly, this is I think a super inspiring example, which is in Spain, the government came down with these gag laws. People were not allowed to protest, they were not allowed to, there was a huge clampdown on the right of assembly, right? So what did people do? They turned themselves into holograms. And there is no pepper spray, I can assure you, that can get you when you're a hologram. So my challenge to you as a community is, let's make the promise of civic witnessing really a reality. And what are we going to do to make people safe and effective? Thank you.